Brilliant. So I'm going to make this session quite interactive. I'm conscious it's the end of the day, and you're probably wondering when you're going to have the chance to get close to a drink. I'm going to ask my panelists to sit down, and whilst they're sitting down, and before I introduce them, I'm going to actually ask you all to engage in a little bit of polling. So we're going to have 3 points today where I'm going to ask you all to do something. And the first is if you could all open your apps. I'm hoping you have the app downloaded. There is a question on the app for you. And the question is, what proportion of the fintech workforce do you think women represent? 43%, 38%, 29%, 18%. Okay, 18%. Wow. Okay. Anyone else want to throw in a last view? Okay. Right, let's take that as the final answer. So it's not 18%, but it is 29%, which is pretty low. And not only is it 29% across the whole of the sector, it's also only 17% in senior leadership positions. So there's a lot to talk about on this, and I'm joined by an amazing panel to do that. What I'm going to do is just ask them all briefly to introduce themselves, and then we're going to kick off with a conversation. Please, Benedetta.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, for inviting me to be here. My name is Benedetta. I'm the co-founder, and I actually have male co-founders of a fintech startup called Oval Money. My journey, it's my first finance startup. I've worked before in Uber, so changing the landscape of transportation. And as I see, I love very regulated industries, and not female-friendly, let's say. And what Oval does is actually to create a platform that allows for inclusion of everybody within the financial planning. So what we do is we created an app that allows people to learn from how they spend and learn to spend better, and take some of this spending and decide to, instead of spending it, save it. So create pots of saving that they then can choose to invest in financial products that we explain to them in a very simple manner. And this, we believe, will create a way in which people become wiser about their money and empowered with their finances.
Thank you, Benedetta. David.
Hi, David Lawlor, Chief Operating Officer of Enforced, co-founder as well with Jane Walsh, who's in Hong Kong at the moment, flying the flag for us. We are a company that looks at conduct risk across institutions, so looks to try and make firms be a bit more responsible in terms of how they operate, so they avoid enforcement notices, and generally look across the industry to see how they can improve that to improve their community.
Hi everyone, I'm Felicia from Akoni. At Akoni, we maximize the return for businesses and SMEs on their cash, a typically neglected asset, and we take all the hassle away by taking a process that takes a few months and reducing that to 1 to 3 days. We work both directly with businesses as an FCA-regulated company with a number of banking partners, as well as with banks to improve their liquidity position. I also work mainly with men and have only ever worked in a really male-dominated environment, and I'm very keen on seeing that status quo change.
Thank you. Michelle Prance from Lloyds Banking Group. As one of the UK's biggest retail banks and also lender to small businesses, we're firmly committed to helping Britain prosper. That's part of our pledge in terms of our commitment to the UK. But also we've made some firm commitments around gender diversity and also ethnic diversity. So we have made from the group down some very broad and public statements which are embedded within the objectives of all of our executives all throughout the organisation to have 40% of females in leadership positions by 2020 and 8% from ethnic minorities. Thank you.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Suzanne Chishti. I'm the CEO and founder of Fintech Circle and the Fintech Circle Institute. What we do are 3 things. On one side, we invest in fintech startups. So we are in Europe the only angel network focused on fintech investments. Normally, it's the first time a company raises money, and we're a group of 80 angel investors here in London. The second thing we do is we advise banks on their innovation journey and which partners to work with. And the third thing is education. So we have published the FinTech book 2 years ago, which has become a global bestseller now, so it's available in 107 countries, and we are publishing 2 more books in May. One is on wealth tech, and one is on insurtech. And our Fintech Circle Institute provides courses, online courses, but also in-person training for anybody who wants to upskill themselves.
Thank you so much. So a fantastic panel to address this really important topic. I wanted to start with you, Michelle, if I may, which is to ask you, as the representative of a really large player on this important agenda, and you've talked about some of the commitments the company's already made.
Yeah.
But what do you see as the role of larger corporations versus maybe some of the smaller players in the market to address the gender gap in fintech?
I think there's been a lot said recently in terms of what the various roles of those are. We firmly believe that this is an opportunity for both fintech and big tech and large organizations to work together. As I said, our core business is around helping Britain prosper, and that is around creating the best financial services for both our clients and also our small businesses. In order to do that, we need to come from a diverse mix of either, small tech who are more agile, who maybe have some better customer experiences, coupled with some of our financial expertise around, lending and credit. So we firmly believe that there is a symbiotic relationship, and it's one that we actively nurture. So another program that we have that some of the team here are actually part of is we actually have over 100 fintechs in our fintech mentoring scheme, where we have matched, co-founders and starters with senior leaders from inside the organization, so that they can help each other in thinking differently if you're inside a bank, but also then thinking a little bit how the corporate world works if you're outside of a big institution.
Fantastic, thank you. One of the issues that's often talked about in the context of the ability to have a truly diverse workforce in fintech is the difficulty, perhaps, sometimes in attracting investment into companies that have female leaders. Felicia, if I may turn to you to talk about this, both to reflect a bit on your own experience in sourcing investment for your company and what you've seen elsewhere, and then perhaps maybe a comment about what you're doing as an individual about that.
Yeah, sure. We're obviously a fintech early stage startup, and all our investors, most of our investors, particularly the larger ones, are men, or the decision makers are driven and made by men, which has been a very interesting experience for me in trying to understand the different risk appetite and the risk profile of women, and how they see early stage businesses, and whether that is something that there needs to be some more education in the market. And it's quite important for me how that starts to come across, because we've dealt with Angel Academy, which is a female angel network, in addition to a variety of early stage institutional investors. On the whole, I find it very subtle. So it isn't something that you can pinpoint as someone who goes out, I'm the CEO, but my founding team are two other men. And it isn't, you can't do anything other than continue and press on. The research, for instance, says, the McKinsey research said that female founder businesses, or women in the female leadership team, those businesses increase returns on investment by 30%. But that still does not change the overall market appetite, not only for female-driven investors, but also for those in minorities, which I think is an unbelievable travesty. And I also think that men who feel, and I feel this very strongly, that there's nothing that should be done, and we are in a meritocracy, and it's just happened so coincidentally that only the men have risen to the top, and coincidentally that only, typically white men are backed by white men. I really feel that you need to take a long, hard look at yourselves, and in particular if you have daughters, whether this is an environment that you want to raise them in, and make your own pledges, which I'm sure we'll come on to later, as to how this can be supported, both in the returns on investment. I also feel that the diversity improves the type of products that are available to most of the population. So further, we actually tend to more democratize the kind of financial products that are available.
And just to follow up on that, you yourself have sort of put your money where your mouth is in terms of becoming an angel investor.
Yeah.
What's your experience of being an angel investor?
Well, I think it's quite difficult because I obviously take a lot of risk in my own capacity, in my own business already. So looking at being an angel investor as a female, you make the judgments and you have to decide for yourself where you want to place your funds and whether you want to actively look at angel investing in other businesses and building those. But like I said, I think most women, for instance, do not even know what the benefits of SEIS and EIS in this country are, which are significant for any women who are in the audience, or men and women in the audience. I mean, for an investment of 100, your maximum exposure would be 44. I'm just as an example under EIS, because HMRC or the government is trying to incentivize you to take early stage risks to encourage innovation. These are significant incentives for investors, and understanding that is very important. It's something where I think women need to look across a broader risk profile, and typically you need a good financial and tax advisor for that kind of planning. But it's critical for understanding and supporting the next generation of leaders, in my view.
So I promised to make you work 3 times. The second time is now, so I'm going to ask you to pull out your apps again to join us in another polling question. And this time the question is to ask you, out of the 275 company members of Innovate Finance, how many are led by women? Your options are 41, 36, 26 and 17. Thank you. So, okay. Right. It seems like someone has been doing their homework. So actually the answer is correct. It is 26 of the member companies of Innovate Finance who are led by women, which I think everybody would collectively agree is a pitifully low number. So let's carry on talking about this important topic. I think one of the issues that highlights there, and I was going to turn to you on this, David, is that if people can't see the female-led businesses active in fintech in organizations like Innovate Finance, it's very hard to know who they can aspire to be in the future. So tell me a bit about how important you see role models in changing the gender gap.
I think it's very important. Just one of my panelists that talked about if you've got daughters, you should take an active thing. But I think if you've got sons as well, you want your sons to look at it in a different way. And I actually met my co-founder and CEO, Jane Walsh, in a supermarket. We're both parents at the same school, and discussed about jumping from traditional industries into fintech. Okay, so it was a massive leap of faith for myself, and a massive leap of faith for Jane as well. But I think one of the things that I talk about in terms of a role model, someone like Jane is a role model because Jane has the courage to do it. Others talk about it, and she actually stands up and says, I'm going to do this. And anyone that's ever met Jane Walsh knows how much energy she's got. She shows leadership qualities. She's a team player, and she has to be a team player because we're a small startup. So you each have to pitch in and do all sorts of different roles. And ultimately, I think where she is just performance. Consistently performs at a good level. But I think going through the middle of that is the courage to do that, is the courage to stand up. And I said, inviting someone like myself onto the panel today, Jane could have sit here and probably inspire the whole room, but actually I think it's important that male perspective on this as well. And actually men take a bit of an active role in this, and actively go to companies where they have this, readily this type of thing, innovation like this within these firms, culturally. There's another lead I wanted to talk about as well, was someone I've had the benefit of working in big organisations, but someone called Deborah Wharton, who is number 2 at Thomson Reuters. And again, I talked about courage. She was one of these sort of people that if you work for her, she had great leadership, great team player, always backed you, but regularly her performances kept on improving. She kept on reinventing herself, but also having the courage to go to whatever role it was and grab that role and inspire everyone around it. So I think if you see these type of people within these organisations, is you've got to actively follow them, see the traits they've got, and try and bring that into your teams if you're a manager.
Did anyone else want to chip in on role models? It was a point of quite a lot of discussion earlier.
I mean, I'd say for me, one of the things is we talk a lot about support at a corporate level, but what's quite important is the support and the structures at a much earlier stage, potentially at school-going level, where girls seem to step back or not step forward. And I don't quite know whether there's research in terms of to support this and what exactly can be done, but I think that's equally important in the considerations.
Yeah,
you had something else.
I'm also a parent of 2 young children, but one of the things we talk about a lot is around how do you promote for potential versus attainment? And women quite often shy away from things that perhaps they haven't attained yet, whereas, men quite often will go for things where perhaps they haven't had that attainment. And this is something through the whole level from primary school all the way up through university, and also, for those at lower levels in our organizations, we need to be really pushing, and I think within our recruitment, looking at our own biases that occur, both of us, both men and women, at all those levels.
Yeah.
It's really something that we need to be very, very conscious of, that we hire the best people, have the diverse candidates coming through, and creating those opportunities for girls where actually it's not all about attainment, there is potential that we're looking for to drive that pipeline.
I agree.
So I wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, because we frequently talk about tech as potentially a problem in achieving the important objectives we're talking about in terms of diversity in the workplace. But I think some of the work that you've done, Benedetta, shows the ability for tech to actually be a tool to achieve some of the inclusion objectives that we're all trying to think about in the workplace. I'd love to hear a bit more from you about how you think fintech could play a really important role in terms of changing the gap itself.
Yeah, I think when we talk about tech being a problem is because clearly in the, let's say, STEM or technology sort of roles, it's still really hard to find a lot of women, so in the developing side. What is important is to create a company whereby, even though there is a predominantly male set of developers, because that's what there is today, is train new women to feel comfortable in these kind of roles, but also create products together and have a product team or a marketing team that is made up of also women. And this allows you to think about products and deliver them to a group of users that is, inclusive of the population. One of the things that I've realized by working at a startup like Uber and then at building my own startup like Oval Money is that platforms can be very disruptive in the sense that they take off the intermediation in the middle, and that creates bias. So if you can go straight to the customer at the end, then you're giving inclusion to a bigger chunk of the population that might feel like walking into a bank and sitting with a bank manager would not be as comfortable, and talking about finance and not being able to feel like they feel educated enough to sit in front of a financial advisor could be difficult. And so by technology stepping into that last mile and creating that benefit and that product that users can feel like they can relate to better and they can do it in the comfort of their own home, kind of eliminates a little bit of that bias. And that's with Oval what we're trying to do. It's really interesting. We have a lot of our users, like a 50-50 split of users between male and female, which is really interesting for a small tech startup, whereby usually your first, influencers, the first people who use fintechs are other fintech people, so generally male. And then what happens if you have only this group of users, you sort of do planning on product, you do questionnaires, you ask about what they're looking for, and then you're biased by definition of your user base. So we try and create a user base that is as much as possible 50-50, so that we can actually build with our community products that are suitable for everyone.
Fantastic. So this is, after all, the Innovate Finance Global Summit. And so I wanted to ask you, Suzanne, as somebody who's worked in many different places overseas and indeed worked for many global companies, what examples of best practice in this space can you share with us today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm Austrian from Vienna, and I live in London since 20 years and worked for large international companies. One was Morgan Stanley, where I spent lots of time in New York, and also in Hong Kong. And I think what I saw, I had a wonderful female boss So she was one of my role models, and she was a great leader, and she had this secret code of conduct. And one of those elements was, the partners she chose to work with they couldn't just be all male. So if there was a team, a supplier wanted to come and do business with Morgan Stanley, and the whole team which was pitching to us was just an all-male team, they wouldn't have gotten a contract. And I think those type of rules, should be embedded in an organization where you kind of set certain diversity requirements in your procurement process, in the ways you make decisions. At the same time, I've seen wonderful diversity in China. There are lots of, tech giants, lots of companies who have got top female leaders, very outspoken, very strong role models, I think, for the whole country as well and for all of us. So I've really seen it in both, in both countries. And also, of course, in the Nordic countries. I guess in the Nordic countries, what we often see there is where quotas have been implemented very successfully and where targets have been put in place to achieve a faster path towards diversity. And I think this worked very well because I think often people say, and I agree with that, what you can't measure, you don't get done. And to some extent, everything what we do in business, we want to measure. We want to set targets, goals. And if we have got significant goals in place, we can move quicker towards it. And I think the best example now, is open banking. Open banking would never have happened on a voluntary basis. I think we all know that, unless PSD2 would have been implemented, unless open banking would have been made mandatory, I think nobody would have opened up. And I think that's true for diversity as well. I think as long as we keep it on a voluntary basis, I think we won't move as fast as we can if we would have more regulatory, more firmer targets in place. And I think those targets, they might be set by the government, but they might really be set by companies. And Fintech Circle, our company, we are part of Women in Finance, the initiative by Treasury, which of course is a great initiative I think all of you should be part of, where we try to set ourselves targets to move towards. And I think the more we all do that, together, I think the more we achieve.
Now, we've got some great questions from the audience. I'm afraid we won't have time for all of them, but the first one I wanted to ask was a question around male allies. So what can male allies in non-leadership positions, or indeed in leadership positions too, do to help? Anybody got anything they'd like to contribute? Felicia?
I have, in particular, obviously I mentioned that most of our investors are men. They also mainly are strategic investors, so that they themselves have significant amounts of experience in either banking or very large-scale enterprise sales, whatever the case may be. And what I have found, the difference is significant when I have an introduction or when they come with me to a meeting of a personal contact of theirs. And they clearly are not doing this because they feel they're doing me a favor. They're doing it because they believe in our platform and our product and myself and my team's ability to deliver. So that personal relationship instantly provides credibility. There's nothing in the world that compares to that, and it's similar to the one-on-one mentorship type roles, that personal relationship. So I think if there's anything, if there are platforms or whatever the case may be that you yourself out there support, to actually do something in terms of networking that supports that. That's my number one takeaway.
Anyone else got anything to add?
Just personally, I think men have got to take more responsibility in this instance. I really do, and it's not just what it looks like exterior. It's actually yourself as an individual. You've got to actively do stuff and make things change. Because it's the only way it's going to happen.
So we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to spend the last few minutes doing the third thing that I said I would make you do as part of the audience, which is to really talk about something that I'm absolutely delighted Innovate Finance are launching this afternoon, which is really a request for every single person at this conference today to make a personal commitment of what either your company or you as an individual will be doing on this really important agenda to address the diversity gap within fintech. We're going to be using a hashtag called Women in Finance Pledge, WIF Pledge. And I would love if anyone was brave enough from this audience to actually stand up today and talk about a commitment they are willing to do either as an individual or as a business. That would be amazing. I don't know if we have a mic anywhere that could help facilitate that. Okay, there's somebody at the back there to kick that off. If you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself, and then we can tweet about you later.
Hello, I'm Sharon O'Day, and last week for International Women's Day we launched the Fintech Parity Pledge. So anyone in this room can go to fintechparitypledge.org and make a commitment to either work with event organisers just like Innovate Finance have today to ensure that there is diversity at their events, but also to make a personal commitment not to speak on manuals. So that's something that any of us can do. Thanks. So it's fintechparitypledge.org, but I thought I'd hijack.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Okay, we've got somebody at the front here. Yep. Please.
Hi, I'm Kate Simmons from Lloyds Banking Group. For International Women's Day, we had a code club on site at Chiswell Street, where we're based, which was to some of the points made on the panel around just the point at which very, very young girls kind of this whole idea of what's available to them and what potential careers are available to them drops off a cliff. And it was so inspiring just to see these kind of girls engaging. So I would like to pledge holding another event of those as a team.
Fantastic, thank you. Anyone else? Let's take someone over there in the middle. Yeah, perfect.
Young gentleman? No.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm Will from Akoni. We'd like to pledge that we are committed to maintaining or exceeding our current standard of having a 50% female workforce.
Fantastic. And there was a gentleman just right behind you.
Thanks, Chris. Dave Cunningham from CEO of Priya. I pledge to be honest as we scale over the next few years. We hired a really awesome head of business development who I'd worked with before, and I needed to find out her salary range, and when she told me, I said, "You're not asking for enough." So I think both male and female who are hiring, we need to be honest and tell women in particular that we're going to pay you properly because we're all complicit otherwise.
Like the BBC and Navratilova today.
So, sadly, with the other hands that were around the room, we won't have time to go through all of you now, but please tweet after this event, WIF Pledge, put down what your personal commitment is, what your company's commitment is, and we'd love to try and reinforce that and get the message out in the market that this is something we can all play a role in addressing. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.